Welcome back to Beyond the Uniform. I'm Justin Asiri, and my goal is to help members of the military community thrive in their post-service career and life. Today's episode number 446, Growing Black Rifle Coffee with Evan Hafer.
I spent about $1,800 just buying bags and a few other things initially, and built my own website and started trying to sell coffee online. So I basically started Black Rifle from passions that I had previous, but ultimately to test the market.
Well, today's episode originally aired back in August of 2017. At the time, I was talking to Evan about his incredible growth from 1.8 thousand to 20 million in 2.5 years for his company, Black Rifle Coffee. Little would I know that company would go on to IPO this year for $1.7 billion. The price to earning ratio was an unheard of 100. They did the IPO to hire over 10,000 U.S. military veterans, and their stock jumped 43% in the company's first day of training. So this is a story of going back to the origins of Evan when Black Rifle Coffee was just in its second year. And I and probably no one else could have ever expected where Evan would take things, but I knew, just at the time and talking to him that he was on to something and was a really savvy and smart entrepreneur. As always, at beyondtheuniform.org, you'll find show notes with links to everything we discuss, as well as 445 episodes just like this one. With that, let's dive into my conversation with Evan. Joining me today in Salt Lake City, Utah, is Evan Hafer. Evan, welcome to Beyond the Uniform.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
So for listeners, I wanted to give a quick background on Evan. He is the founder and CEO of Black Rifle Coffee, which is a small batch coffee roasting company. He started out at the University of Idaho, after which he spent 14 years in the U.S. Army as an infantryman, a Special Forces soldier, and a CIA contractor. So maybe, Evan, just to kick things off, anything to add or amend to that intro?
Yeah, I mean, I actually had about 20 years of government service. So I joined the National Guard in '95 while I was in college, and then I finished my career still in the National Guard in 2015. So I spent 20 years either on active duty or in the reserves, and I spent 9 years with the agency as a contractor. So I spent a lot of time with the government, just in general.
That's awesome. Well, one of the things I always like to ask as a starting point is, how did you make the decision when you first left the military or government service and decided to become a civilian? How did you approach that decision?
I had been thinking about it for at least 2 years prior. I was ready to make the transition. I'd actually went in and had another business up in Idaho, whitewater rafting, fly fishing, basically an expedition style company. And I was planning on getting out and then going back to going to grad school or something like that. And I really was just burnt out with back and forth Afghanistan and Iraq. I was coming up on 20 years of service and just kind of looking for something else other than carrying a carbine in a combat zone, basically.
That's awesome. And it sounds like you had thought of doing the whitewater rafting and this expedition business once you got out. What was your first job search like once you left the Army?
I didn't really have one. It's pretty interesting. I knew that I was going to start my own business. I knew that because I had a couple other businesses. I'd been roasting coffee for 10 years, roughly, back in Afghanistan, Iraq. So I knew that I was transitioning out to start my own business. I had another company that I had purchased a few years before, and I was roasting coffee. I really wasn't thinking of doing a online roast to order coffee company. I was thinking of doing something completely different. Actually, my wife and I were planning on opening up a coffee shop a coffee shop in Idaho or one of the mountain states, and we had kind of gone back and forth on what we wanted to do. Ultimately, what we found was we wanted to try to test the market, or I wanted to try to test the market. I didn't want to spend, a couple $100,000 trying to get a coffee shop and, put all the machines and everything in it. Ultimately, I wasn't sure if we could make it work. So with low barriers of entry, basically, I could build a website and invest a limited amount of capital into the business model of Black Rifle Coffee. I spent about $1,800 just buying bags and a few other things initially, and built my own website and started trying to sell coffee online. So I basically started Black Rifle from passions that I had previous, but ultimately to test the market.
And I guess what happened when you did that? What was the point at which you thought there's something here? What changed your mind of like testing out the market and thinking I'm gonna go all in on this?
It was pretty easy. I was roasting enough coffee at that time where basically I was roasting enough coffee for a couple different restaurants and a few of my friends. And when I stood up the website and I started making making transactions or selling coffee online, I was like, after my first month, I basically repaid the money that I had put into the company in bags, and I was fairly convinced at the end of the first month of business that this was going to work.
And I guess maybe to set the stage, because I want to ask you a ton of questions about this, how would you describe for a veteran listener, how would you describe Black Rifle Coffee and who you are? And then any also metrics that you might want to put around that in terms of head count or whatever you're comfortable disclosing, just so they get a sense of where you're at currently.
Yeah, that's pretty easy. So basically, starting a company with low barriers of entry and basically a business concept. A lot of people say, I need a full-blown business plan. Okay, well, I'm a military guy. Most people transitioning through, we go through a lot of planning and a lot of training specifically around the planning cycles. And every plan, what we say is like every plan doesn't survive the first contact, right? And so what I tell guys, or at least one of my favorite things is, yeah, sure, write a 5-paragraph op order, but the mission statement of your 5-paragraph op order can't be wrapped around a tactic. So it has to be a strategic goal in your life, meaning, I needed economic emancipation from the government. So what my mission statement literally was, I will become economically emancipated from the government and be able to feed my family, specifically through a independent or autonomous endeavor. So, I wrote out a mission statement, and then I put a combination of things that I could do within within my operations order, basically. And so a lot of guys, I think they get really consumed with a tactic, not, a TTP, tactics, techniques, and procedures. They start really getting into just like, okay, well, I have to be this. I didn't. I was really just kind of attached to the fact that I wanted to be free from the USG. And I started really diving into marketing more than anything else, like marketing, branding, and then implementing tech. With the ability to say, okay, well, if I can market one of the skills that I have, meaning I was roasting coffee and I was throwing around carbines. That's basically my two professional tools that I had in my bag were those two things. And it's like, well, Black Rifle Coffee was built out of those two things. And then ultimately, I started getting a positive ROI from the marketing dollar really early. So I could really look at something and go, okay, if I spend $10, but I'm going to make 20, depending on COGS and a few other things, I can actually make a profit, and that profit is acceptable, especially if you're starting to scale. So I started a company in my garage with $1,800. I didn't hire any employees for my first year. So it was just me. My wife was plugging in but part-time and only for about 6 months of that first year. So I was doing customer service, roasting and coffee, doing customer service, packaging and shipping, doing all my website, basically all my website creative and photography and social media. So I was a one-man show. And people, excuse me, I think a lot of guys were like, well, that seems fairly difficult. And it was. I only slept about 4 hours a night for the first year I was in business. And I worked nonstop, 7 days a week. I had a thermarest basically in my shop, and then eventually in my office. I made I hired employee number one after my first year. And then when I rounded the corner after my second year, I had 26 employees, and now I have 84 employees. So, and now, I started in a little 1 pound roaster in my shop. I've never taken out any debt in this company. That's another big thing. I've never taken on investment capital, and I've never taken on any in debt. I run the company completely off its own profit margins. I've been able to scale the company, recruit talent, continue to purchase, anything and everything that I need to grow the company. But I also can't run the company ashore with, a bloated debt line on the P&L, right? So it allows me to scale appropriately and not scale kind of out of my own means.
That's so awesome, Evan. I think it's so incredible. And I think it can't be overstated how rare in today's TV hyped startup environment it is to see someone who, what you have done is you have built a business. Like, it's not like you've built speculation. It's not like you brought in investors and sold vaporware. Like, you were just building it brick by brick from the ground up. And I love your transparency in that first year of just how you were doing everything. And I can only imagine the fact that for that first year, you did absolutely everything that allowed you to be able to hire and to be able to build a team, because you knew what everyone was going to be doing. You knew every last detail of the business, and it put you in a better spot to be able to grow, grow from that point. I think it's a really incredible story.
Right, and I still do, to be honest with you. When I talk to guys in my shipping and logistics department, I can beat them up over 3 cents in a box, and I know if I'm going to buy 12 tons of cardboard from China, I know plus or minus 3 cents what that price should be, and having the ability to kind of look back in the first year of my business, and there's nothing that I couldn't tell you about this business. I can tell you, like, my P&Ls, like, literally down to the month, down to almost the cent for the last 2.5 years. And I think my employees still kind of like they're in awe just in the fact of how much I know about the business. But that is because I've spent so much time, with my sleeves up, just turning wrenches on this. That's what I say. I'm turning wrenches on this thing constantly. And I'll spend an hour or two in shipping and receiving, another hour or two in purchasing. I did my own fulfillment for, a year and some change. So just, doing your fulfillment, like packing a box and understanding exactly how you want the product to be displayed. When the customer receives that box, when it hits their doorstep, the thing that they have to understand from Black Rifle Coffee is literally no detail from my perspective can be overlooked. So, I try to drive a pretty detail-oriented ship, and granted, we miss things, but it's not because we're not trying. It's because ultimately, when you're sending out a few thousand shipments a day now, you miss a few things, and it's not as precision as I would like it to be because I can't do every box anymore, right? So you kind of have to let go. I can't pack every box anymore, and I know that. So you just try to do the best to put your DNA into the company, and hopefully it translates through all of it.
Mm. This is great. I know so many veterans and active duty members who listen to the show. They aspire to start their own company, and I love what you said at the start around the mission statement and how it sounds like you weren't committed to a single idea, and I love that you were committed more to that lifestyle of living a financially free life. And I appreciate your, sharing that the $1,800 you initially invested in the company. I'm curious, how long was it until you were able to start paying yourself a salary?
14 months. So 14 months. My first paycheck was to myself was $2,000 a month, and now, and I'll tell you guys, we'll do over 20 million annual this year, and I still only pay myself $70K. So it's not, I went from 2,000 to 4,000 in increments, but ultimately, 2.5 years, I've only been paying myself for a little over a year now, and I'm still building. It's a difficult process, and I always look at it too, like, the more money you take out of the business, the less it's going to grow. And, if I can spend another $5,000 on mugs per month, then I'll do it. And if I can't, then I can't. So it's one of those things where if I can't take too much, and I know a lot of guys, they make that mistake really early. I sold 2 houses. My wife and I lived on literally less than a $2,000 a month budget. I went from making, $250,000 a year as basically a high-paid contractor for the United States government to making nothing, and then for over a year, nothing. So, and like I said, I had sold 2 houses, a truck, like half my guns, my initial coffee roaster that I had outgrown. I sold all that stuff just to keep going. And my wife was like she was ready to kill me, but it's definitely worth it. I mean, now today, as we look around, it's, I've got a 40,000 square foot building. I've got a 60 kilo roaster, all of those things. Like I said, they're paid for, which is unheard of,
This is incredible. I want to back up because, it sounds like in your 20 years of service, you had the whitewater rafting company. You were doing different things that you were learning about business. I'm particularly interested for listeners who are on active duty right now. What were some of the things you did on active duty that, in retrospect, helped you to start Black Rifle Coffee?
Well, I was a special forces guy, so I was training indigenous soldiers, so I was running budgets, whether that was payroll, every day in mission planning. If you're running a small indigenous force, you're running a business. And I started looking at it going, okay, so if I can run these Afghans that have the rough equivalent of a 3rd grade education, if I can train them to be autonomous within the base infrastructure, and then do unilateral or multi-level kinetic operations, there's a lot of this that translates directly into business. So I started thinking about that really early, where this is like a little small business. And, if you don't run your budget in a very strict and proficient way, you're really kind of setting yourself up for your own failure. So, that was one of the things. too, I kind of had the unique opportunity of working with some guys that also had some small businesses. So everybody's kind of getting some small business stuff on the side. My original mentor, he had been a special forces guy and then eventually transitioned to his own small business. I think I'd always had it in my back of my mind that I was going to be a business owner. So every part of my service, I was kind of looking at it like, okay, so how does this translate into business? You know, troop leading procedures, how can I translate those into the business world later on? And when I'm done with service, I have to be able to take all these skills that we've learned and translate those into something that I can monetize. And I knew that. Not in the concept of like, okay, I need to be able to tell all these stories and then, you know, monetize off my story. That wasn't it. It was, how do I take these skills? Because these are, you know, very unique skills that a small fraction of people ever acquire. You know, military people are the most driven and some of the most successful complex problem solvers in the world. So for us, when I look at, you know, military men, when I look at my service, I would say always look for the opportunity to translate what you're doing now into what you want to do in the future.
I think that's such incredible advice, whether, you know, a listener is thinking of starting a company or whether they're considering going into, you know, work for a consulting company. I think that is so great. It's not about those stories. It's about the experience and how they could leverage that in their next career. I think that's a great approach too, just to help people get the most value out of whatever they're doing right now. Just try to find a way to learn and try to find a way to apply that to your future career.
Well, and then seek professional development opportunities, not only to say, okay, well, you know, a lot of the guys that I was with, they're infantrymen, special forces guys, you know, hard combat skills guys. But, you know, professional development within the military seeks some skills that the military can pay for, basically, but they might not be directly translatable to your MOS right now, but how is that going to look in the future? And, you know, I went to a lot of different schools when I was in, and then not only there, but, you know, whether it was at the agency, but I also would come back and take professional development training when I was home. So that's one of the things I really loved, was being able to, like, you know, pop in. One of the things I really, really love is just there's this total access to online learning, right? So, you know, there's so many different ways that you can learn just online that you don't necessarily need the United States military. Definitely take that, whatever it is, but you also have the ability to have the United States military pay for all the professional development that you want to do within, you know, a comprehensive left and right limit. But I mean, I can't tell you how many courses I've either taken online or come back and taken, you know, I've sat in like universities for like 2 weeks, just literally going to class in a class that I wasn't paying for, just to look at like macro or microeconomics, just so I could have, you know, a little bit of fun to listen to somebody else's take on something.
That's one of the things I wanted to ask you about is resources you would recommend to listeners. And I'm wondering, and I love this approach of always seeking professional development. I'm wondering, in the last couple of years, is there any book or class or seminar or anything that you've done that's helped you in entrepreneurship that you would recommend to listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I would say Coursera is one of those. I don't know if you guys know or you've taken a look at that. Coursera is fantastic. It's got an online catalog from a bunch of different universities, you know, from Penn State to Michigan and Stanford. You know, I had signed up for some courses through Wharton. Fantastic outlet, and I think from there you've got a lot of access. Just on Coursera. Then you've got Udemy, which is another great online learning I think it's, they have a bunch of different courses from specific personalities. So like on Google AdWords and things like that. And then Linda is a fantastic resource. Like, it's amazing. So anytime I hit an obstacle, like, that's the thing that guys are always asking me, like, how do you figure that out? I'm like, okay, well, the first thing I would do is Google it. The second thing I would do is I would take a course on it. Like, how do you build a dashboard, right? How do you build a dashboard that has your key performance indicators based on division? Well, that's something that there's no way I can tell you how to do that based on my previous military experience. But what I can do is I can Google, key performance indicators and start taking courses on how to plug that stuff in as far as like a piece of software, whichever that might be. And it might take you a couple days. Like, you can't be too impatient. I think the best books that I've read in the last several years, Built to Last and Good to Great, are probably they're literally go-to. I mean, Good to Great, literally, I've either read it, I've listened to it on podcasts, so I've like taken notes in the corners of my book on that, and then I've listened to it probably 6 times. So I think those are some of the best books that I've read in the last couple years. And then podcasts, like every day that I can get in and listen to like a half hour on marketing or leadership, management, anytime I can spend like a half hour just listening to somebody else. They might not give you just the most sage advice at that time, but who knows what type of idea that might inspire and what kind of thread you'll end up pulling on the sweater. You know what I mean?
This is great. And for listeners at beyondtheuniform.io, I'll put in the show notes links to all of this with Coursera, Udemy, Linda, and the books that Evan's recommended as well. What has been the most challenging moment to date in your entrepreneurial journey? Is there like a single moment you can think of that was just really a low point or a most challenging point?
Yeah, I mean, when you have 80 people that work for you, you develop personal relationships with people, and sometimes, that what I call it is an ecosystem, right? This is an ecosystem, and people provide the balance in the ecosystem. And, terminating people or repurposing them, having really frank discussions with people just in general about work performance, how they fit into the ecosystem. Those are incredibly difficult things to have. And I know that a lot of business owners, they avoid tough discussions with employees, and I know why, because you really want the best. For me, I really want the best for people. However, some people will never conform to the environment that you're trying to build, and you might love them and appreciate them, but they might just not be a good professional fit for your ecosystem. And I would say that the hardest part about my job is, one, managing people is a very difficult task, and then two, knowing that you like people, they're good people, but they just don't fit into your company. That's difficult. That's a very difficult challenge, because the company's ecosystem always has to be in balance. That's kind of my 2 cents, which is, there's like an old saying that I've continued to say, hire slow, fire fast. And that doesn't mean that firing people is going to be any easier. It just means that you have to do it in order to grow the company. And it doesn't mean that they're bad people. It just means that they don't fit into the company's ecosystem.
Yeah, that's so spot on. I think it's such a great lesson where it's not about, I sometimes think about it's not even about like whether they're good or bad. I like that ecosystem concept, and it's sometimes I think about it in terms of like,
I've got my leadership strengths and failings, and I have to build around that. And it doesn't mean the person's good or bad, but it's like if they don't fit in with my abilities, we're just not going to succeed as a team. So I love that ecosystem thought of just, is this person a good fit for the environment? And they could be talented and smart and great, but they might not jive with the overall culture you've built. And it's I imagine it's difficult to toe that line and to draw that line in the sand, but I can only imagine how much that benefits the rest of your team when you really stick to that and commit to it.
Yeah, and I use that analogy a lot. I shouldn't say a lot, but I've used it a lot in the last few months where, a redwood grows really well in the redwood forest. And it doesn't grow all that well, in Sonora, right? So just because a guy doesn't fit in your company doesn't mean that he's not going to fit in somebody else's company or do something on his own. Because each person has different professional attributes, and if they're good people wherever they go. It might not be the greatest cultural fit. And I think that's the hardest part for not only employers, but employees is we tend to kind of over exaggerate their failures when you have people. And it might not be a failure on either part. It could be just a failure for, conforming to the environment. And I think that that's such a detrimental part of termination for some managers is they'll take this stance like, okay, well, you're done here. So whereas I try to say, hey, listen, this is not a good fit. How do we make you succeed somewhere else? And they either take it or they leave it. You know what I mean? They either like it or they don't.
I love that too, because it seems like I'm starting to realize now as well that it's a disservice to that person to try to make it work if it's not the ideal fit for them.
Right.
And they're smart. They're going to find something that's great. They're going to find something that's ideal for them, and it's almost like preventing them from finding that ideal opportunity by, it seems to me like often my pride gets involved. Like I need to make them succeed here, or I have an obligation to them. And it's like if my obligation is truly to what's best for them, it's going to be them being in their ideal company, in their ideal role. And that doesn't mean it has to be with my company.
Yeah, exactly. I feel the same way. I mean, it's a relationship. And, now I always say that if you're malicious, now that's totally different, right? Versus like the person that's just not conforming to the environment, that's an easy fit. It's like, hey, let's try to find you someplace that's more appropriate. And I think a lot of guys they don't get that. It took me a long time to understand that too. Okay, maybe this person is an awesome person, but we're just not awesome together, right? And it sounds so familiar to like, dating and relationships, right? It really does.
It is. That's awesome.
Not be codependent.
Yeah.
Let's be better together.
What has been, we talked about the most challenging moment to date. What has been the most rewarding moment so far?
I think the most it's actually not just one. It's not one moment. It's I always tell people, like, when I was with the government, it was a pleasure to serve. It really was. It was a pleasure to serve the country. But I got to the point where I wasn't really enjoying my job, right? I wasn't enjoying my profession. And here, right now in my life, like I go from my house, which I've got, two little girls, like 3.5 and 8 weeks. I've got a beautiful wife. Like I've got a very loving household and great home. And I go to a place, my place of work is, 10 minutes away, and it's full of just people that are competent, motivated, and they love me, and I love them. So it's like, I don't want to sound too hippie in this, but every corner of my life, even though there is stress, I know that there are great people going from my house to my work. and nothing in my life doesn't inspire me at this point. Like, I'm not like dragging my feet going to something, right? And I've never really had that. It's like you're always looking up a hill going, okay, I've got this thing to climb. It's very strange to look forward to every day and almost every minute of your life where you never have before, and I think that's probably the greatest achievement that I've had, is just the fact that I've been able to rapidly change my life from a point 2.5 years ago, where a good portion of my professional life I really was just unhappy, I was unfulfilled, to now where every day is a challenge. Every day I feel like the people around me are just fantastic, excellent people. And that it's so rewarding. It's really hard for me to explain. It's just so rewarding to know that there's nothing that I don't look forward to in my day,
That's awesome. I mean, it comes through. I'm sure to everyone listening, it comes through just in the energy and the voice, in your voice, and the excitement. And it is so awesome to hear about that, of finding something that comes across more of as a calling than as a profession, and something where you just really derive enjoyment. And I think going back to, it's very clear that you're committed to lifelong learning, and you're constantly Googling and Courseraing different things to learn. And I just have a theory that those two things go together, that part of that fulfillment comes from the team you've built, but I think part of the fulfillment comes that it's clear that every day you are growing and you're learning something new, and I think that leads to a tremendous amount of fulfillment. So I think that's just a great role model for veterans who are listening, that you can create a life of fulfillment, and you can create a life where you are excited about going home and going to work. And I just really applaud you for and appreciate how you've deliberately created that and set up this blueprint for other veterans to show them that, if they're committed to that as their mission statement, they can make that work. It may be different than what they set out with. It may be different what they start out with, but if they're committed to that, they can find that.
Yeah, I think I started with the mission statement of economic emancipation. That was kind of the big goal. But I think everybody has to define what happiness. Everybody's like, that's kind of a millennial thing where they're like, yeah, I want to be happy. And a lot of people think that's an instant gratification type model, where happiness to me is where, one, I love to work. I love just the art of business, but I love just rolling up my sleeves and going to work. So happiness, I think, when you kind of retract everything back and you say, okay, I'm emancipating myself from government service. I need to be able to create enough wealth so I can live my life and become happy, right? Well, a lot of people, they say, okay, well, happiness is just through wealth. And I'm like, well, wealth can be a means to an end, but if you're not happy along the way, and I've really kind of talked about this a lot, where I'm like, you know what, you have to enjoy the mountain climb, not just the summit, right? You have to enjoy that. And you can't just look back and go, look at the summit of this. If you didn't enjoy the climb, it was all kind of, it just becomes a lot more laborious. So my true, my true driving force was always to build a team that we're all pursuing the same thing, which is happiness and economic emancipation. And we had to have a collective definition, and that's how the culture fits in, right? Is you have to have this collective definition, and how everybody defines those things will specifically help the company. So if a person defines happiness, for instance, right? If a person defines happiness as being, introverted and not working and sitting in their apartment and watching TV, they're probably not going to fit in here, right? But if they define happiness as having a big extended family with a lot of opportunity and a lot of work, they're going to fit in. Like, they're going to fit in just fine. So it's all about how you define the big concepts.
I'm wondering, you've covered a lot of different things. I'm just wondering for that veteran who's listening that aspires to start their own company, who desires to seek that financial freedom through their own enterprise, what other advice do you have for them about how to go about doing that, or things to keep in mind as they do it?
One more time, sorry. I missed, you cut out just a second.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I'm just wondering if a veteran is listening and they aspire to start their own company, what advice do you have for them about that?
Well, I think, first and foremost, you have to be dedicated to being a businessman. And even though you serve your country, and it's a very admirable thing, the people of America and the United States, they don't owe you anything. And that, I'm not trying to be negative. I get a lot of guys that come through and they're like, I was a Navy SEAL, I was a Green Beret, I was an infantry guy. That doesn't mean a lot other than that you have to be able to translate those things into a new profession. But you really have to concentrate on not what you've done in the past and what people owe you. It's more about what have you done in the past that makes you a great man or woman that you can leverage in order to become better and a more successful business person. And I think the biggest thing that I can offer people is you have to become humbled at the altar of business, because it will devour you if you think that the world owes you something because you've served your country in the military. It doesn't. It helps because you've got dedication and complex problem solving, but at the end of the day, you still have to roll up your sleeves and make a lot of sacrifices and be more committed to this than anything you've ever done in your life. The most stress I've been under in my life wasn't in the middle of Mosul in 2008, being shot at. It was, having, a wife and a child at home, knowing that, they have to be fed, and knowing that, what I did on a daily basis was going to provide a good or bad life for them. And that's the most stress I've ever had in my life. It's a different type of stress. It's like super constant and very heavy, but I would say you have to dedicate yourself. You have to you have to humble yourself. And you have to take it on as you've never taken on anything else in your life. You have to be so committed to it that nothing can shake your dedication. And you have to prepare for the worst and hope for the best, basically.
Man, it's such incredible advice, and I completely relate to that sense of stress where I was never shot at on submarines, but it's a completely different level of stress knowing that your family is relying on you and knowing that you have to provide for them. And I think also for me, identity gets wrapped up around that too, because then it becomes like, your success as a human being is reliant on the success of a company. And so there's all of these mental things that get in the way and add up to daily in and out stress. And I love what you're saying too about I've heard other guests mention that too, is what they would call like a sense of entitlement to some veterans today. And I love that thought of just approaching it as, the world doesn't owe you anything. You're going to have to earn everything that you get. And so don't expect to be given anything because of your service. And what you did in the military is incredible, and the nation is grateful. And in the world of business, no one's going to give you anything for that. You still have to fight for and earn whatever you get.
Yeah, in some ways you have to fight even harder, because people say, well, you're a military guy, you don't have any formal business training, right? And you have to be prepared for a fight. Like it's not going to be given to you whatsoever. And I'm glad to hear that other people have identified that too.
Well, I'd love to kind of maybe end with, what does the next 12 months look like for Black Rifle Coffee? What's the road ahead for you?
It's interesting. We're going to move out of Salt Lake, so we're moving to another state. We're moving the corporate headquarters probably to Colorado Springs, it looks like. And so the next 12 months, we're going to open up 5 brick and mortar stores around the United States. We're going to have logistics in a couple different locations. We'll have state-specific roasters. So we'll have one in Texas, one in California, one in Colorado, one in Utah. And then we'll have some really big joint projects going with a couple other veteran companies, which I'm really excited about. And I think the next 12 months is going to be really big. We launch our franchise initiative at right about a year and a half from now. So the next 12 months will be a lot of work. We're going to expand quite a bit. And then the big expansion comes at about 18 to 24 months from, September next month. That's the big expansion. So we're just preparing for that.
This is awesome. Well, Evan, I appreciate all the advice you've shared with the community. For listeners, you'll find more info at the show notes, but you'll also find Evan at blackriflecoffee.com. You can order their coffee mugs, and all sorts of different things on their website. And we look forward to seeing the continued growth of your company and this exciting expansion ahead, Evan.
Man, I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and definitely reach out, you guys, if you need anything, because I answer all the emails. So if you hit us up at info@blackriflecoffee, they'll forward everything to me, and then you can hit me up on LinkedIn too if you have any questions.
Surface.
Beyond the Uniform is written and produced by me, Justin Asiri, with the help from our Chief of Staff, Steve Bain, our editor, Lex Brown, and our Head of Social Media, Janelle Hant. We are an all-volunteer organization and would greatly appreciate your help in any of the following ways. First of all, spread the word. Beyond the Uniform has over 380 podcast episodes and 15 on-demand webinars, all offered for free. Help us spread the word on social media, at military bases, or whatever gets this resource in front of the men and women who need it. Positive reviews on iTunes go a long way towards this as well. Second of all, sponsorship. Beyond the Uniform relies on sponsorship to keep us going. There is so much more we'd like to do, but just don't have nearly the resources to do it. If you know of a company that would advertise in any way with Beyond the Uniform, please send them our way. Third of all, donations. If you're in a financial position to donate, you can find more information on the support section of our website. At our website, beyondtheuniform.org, you'll find over 380 episodes categorized by industry, functional role, and more. You'll also find both free and for-purchase resources that take a deeper dive on topics related to career growth. Thank you for your support as we aim to help members of the military and their families thrive in their post-military career and life.